Good morning. My name is Adrienne Martinez. I will be sharing with you the slides and presentation that were given this past weekend at the Stanford MedX Emerging Leaders Program. So I'm going to be showing you this slideshow, which is entitled Air Travel with Insulin, Current Recommendations and Online Resources. I wanted to point out that this project was sponsored entirely by the Stanford MedX Emerging Leaders Program. They connected me with my partner, Schwinn, who you see listed there, and they did encourage me to reach out to a community college student to assist with the vast literature review that had to be undertaken. This was an interesting project because we did a literature review using the scholarly articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals, but we also looked at various online resources, including blogs, travel logs, different things that would be really beneficial in understanding this experience for people trying to travel while they use insulin. So we know that diabetes is a global problem, and when you are on diabetes using insulin, you essentially have to be wary of hypoglycemia, which can happen at any point and is life-threatening. Constant adjustments are needed, and this is really best done in a controlled environment like the home. Even in a workplace, this is possible. But when you're talking about navigating air travel, you're talking about monitoring yourself, potentially giving your insulin in the moment, or making sure that you get the carbohydrates you need if your blood sugar has dropped. And how do you do that in an airport when you have lots of busyness, lots of concerns about getting there on time? You also have really limited and sometimes not terribly hygienic locations to do this testing and administration. So this is the new reality for people who have to use insulin when they travel. They have to take their needles, take medication that really does require refrigeration through security checkpoints in this heightened era of security. So we really do want to look at the logistical reality, but we also want to look at language barriers, social stigma, what that response is in the airport when you're carrying something that has to be refrigerated and or is technically sharps, and what's the response at the gate to that sort of thing. So the idea behind the project was we wanted to recognize what tools and resources are out there that are going to support this sort of international travel for people with diabetes, and what potentially is the need for an information card that could be used by individuals with either type 1 or type 2 when they're traveling internationally and they're navigating these social and environmental situations where people may not be familiar with the disease. So this is where the Emerging Leaders program was really special. I am a PhD student. I'm in the School of Nursing at UCLA, and I look very much at diabetes that is type 2 diabetes, generally seen later in life. I focus on this phenomenon in Latinas, 45 and over. So I have kind of a niche perspective on the diabetes experience. I was connected with a woman named Schwinn, who is Chinese, but was currently living in Paris when we were doing this project, and has since traveled to a variety of countries, including back to China. Now, she does not have diabetes, but she has a caregiver who has diabetes. So even though Schwinn is a full assistance individual who is wheelchair bound and also requires help with, eating, bathing, real basic activities of daily living, diabetes is an issue to her because she needs to make sure that her caregiver is going to be comfortable and safe when they're out in an unfamiliar environment, and sometimes in an unfamiliar country, in especially locations in Europe where they don't generally speak the language. So Schwinn said she had picked up some French, but beyond that, it is still challenging. So we were connected through this MedX program to each other, and ultimately to a mentor who was willing to facilitate telephone meetings and suggest our qualitative data gathering really expand beyond the traditional literature review and delve into the diabetes online community. We had initially created a SurveyMonkey survey that we distributed across Facebook and a few other online platforms, and we were told by our mentor, you may not be getting the accurate perspective just because your questions may be flawed, which I think is a fair assumption. It's always a good idea to get sufficient background and assessment before you go in and try to create even a diagnostic tool, but certainly an intervention. So in addition to the online work, we also did your standard lit review using the terms insulin, diabetes, and travel. We really had to make sure there were no restrictions on the date search parameters because we wanted everything we could possibly get, and there wasn't much, but we were limited by English language only. So we found 8 peer-reviewed articles that were published in scholarly journals, and if you study diabetes, this is an abnormal result. Generally, any sort of diabetes topic, you're going to have to scan through 15,000 articles, and you're going to be able to refine by population, geographic area, all of those things. And so it was really shocking to only find 8. We did, however, between Schwinn, myself, and our research assistant, and his name is Julio, so I'll be referring to him that way from now on. Julio and Schwinn really dug into what does it say on social media, what are the blogs saying, and most especially and importantly, what are the comments that people are leaving at the bottom of these blogs? Because this is where you're going to see some space for disagreement and some space for correction, where people are saying that may be your experience, but it's not mine, and I have my own unique voice. So that was fascinating, and we did also go to these other sites, the ADA, CDC, places where you would expect to find some resources, TSA especially, and the results were a little surprising. In addition to these searches, Schwinn was also going to interview her mother, who was her caregiver with diabetes. I was able to interview someone. The problem here is that we have an N of 2, right, which is essentially meaningless beyond getting a real basic understanding of essentially case studies. So I guess not meaningless, but certainly not generalizable. It definitely helped form our opinions on the topic, but again, just let us know how very much there was that we didn't know. The one plus is that Schwinn is a professional journalist. She travels internationally to work in the media and represent different ableist issues. And she actually was in France because she was working for Vice. So that was a plus on our side. She did also contact companies in China, pharmaceutical companies, to find out what they felt their role responsibility was in supporting air travel for people living with diabetes. And when she spoke with them, they really would only speak unofficially. There was this sense that, well, we would be happy to help educate people when and if a need presents itself. It's not something that's on their radar currently, but they did seem amenable, although I would say not necessarily concerned with the phenomenon. So there we have Julio right there, our community college student, who offered to help assist with the lit review. And he did get third authorship on the project, which I think is wonderful. He is a pre-medical student, and it was really rewarding for me as a PhD student to be able to talk to somebody about kind of the scientific process when we go through investigating a phenomenon, to just kind of further cement that process in my own mind, but also to allow someone to ask questions that I wish I'd been able to ask when I was his age, but aren't really appropriate in a busy, competitive academic environment. You don't want to look silly. You don't want to look like you don't already know something. Maybe you feel like you should know. So that was really rewarding for me personally. I think it was probably helpful to him too. So that's great. And we are creating a video of these capstone findings, which is exactly what you're watching right now. And this will be posted on the Theory Generator Playground channel that is on YouTube. So this is what we found. There was inconsistent advice. The logistics were all over the place. What researchers said, what doctors said, what patients said, what the actual TSA group said, these things were really varying and could be very confusing to people who are trying to travel. There were generic tools, but there were also access issues for these tools, and that's something that we'll go into. And finally, there was inconsistent advice about whether you should even disclose that you have this condition. Because if there's potential that you can skate by under the radar and avoid all of this hassle, that actually might be better for you psychologically. So we saw that a lot of people did recommend that you not disclose, which potentially puts you in a situation where if there were an emergency, people are starting completely cold. They have no background and understanding of what your needs are. Now, what was especially interesting was there were areas of overlap where people not only had confusing advice based on logistics, but when they were given the tools, they felt that they didn't really meet their needs, and that encouraged them to really stay home, to not attempt this international travel. Well, not attempt travel, period. So international travel was really was really out of their potential consciousness as far as what they thought they might enjoy doing, what sort of jobs they could pursue, and really how easy it was going to be for them to visit family and other support systems that were outside of the country. So these areas of overlap really created magnified insecurity and doubt. So to break this down a bit, there were some comments that we pulled related specifically to this inconsistent advice with logistics. Do you need to refrigerate insulin? So this was a big question because I've now been to 3 different nursing schools in my nursing career. First for my RN, my master's, I initially did a licensed vocational nursing degree too. So that certificate program did not expose me to the idea that insulin does not need to be refrigerated. Neither did the master's. And the PhD, it's not something I've ever heard bandied about. So I was shocked to discover that they actually don't need to refrigerate insulin. But what we're talking about is being able to recognize then when temperature adjustments have occurred or when the insulin itself starts to degrade. So that's an issue in and of itself. And the literature you see in green, they can be kept at room temperature for 28 days. Well, that's great to know. But when patients are commenting, the hospital kept pens in the fridge. We heard both instructions, keep it cold. No, it doesn't need to be. And this is my experience on the floor as a nurse. And if I were someone who had heard conflicting advice given to me, I probably would go the safe route. So there are refrigeration units, and some people know about them, some people don't. They could be cost prohibitive. So here's a quote that actually came from one of our interviews. The problem is that the ice will melt during the trip, so we'd need to ask the crew for more ice. The crew rejected our request brutally because the airline's policy doesn't permit it. So that was really concerning to me because this was an experience someone had traveling internationally where they were just doing their best and they felt really rejected. And the term brutally I thought was really concerning because no one wants to feel like they're putting somebody else in some inconvenient situation because of their illness. But most especially, no one wants to be reprimanded for having an illness. So that's certainly a concern. They also said different airlines have different policies. It's really hard to navigate the system. I really don't know which tools to use for storage. So the picture you see right there is the Frio insulin cooling case, and that's probably your top product right now on the market. That's not meant to carry a huge amount of insulin, but it is available. It looks like units run anywhere from about $15 on up. So you could spend $75 maybe. I would say the average is $35 for these devices. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be accessible to all. The main issue that came up, though, as far as logistics, was the fact that when you travel across more than 5 time zones, you need to adjust your meal and medication requirements because the days are shorter or longer as you travel, and that's just a reality. So I was concerned about this, and I did find a website that had a calculator that very specifically allowed you to choose the type of insulin you were using, give your travel details, and it would tell you exactly what it was you needed to do to adjust. Now, I'm a PhD student. I'm used to doing research online. It took me about, I would say, 2 or 3 hours to kind of come across this tool. So I'm wondering how much time and or experience other people would have and would even potentially encounter this. It's well known now, because we have some fantastic data, that Hispanic individuals use their cell phones and mobile phones of any kind to access health information more than other groups. So I want to know whether or not any of my patients who have diabetes are going to stumble across this, because it's a fantastic tool, and maybe us just getting the information about it out there would really help a large number of people. So the tools that exist were primarily this TSA notification card. Now, diabetes is written right there in Chinese, you'll see, because I was working with Xuan and she was talking about traveling from Beijing to France. What are you going to do if your TSA notification card is in English because you're studying at one of the universities we have here in the United States, but you are working in France and you are a Chinese citizen, right? So this is what it might look like. And that's concerning to me, because are you going to print multiple copies of this card and have them in a variety of different languages just to make sure that stuff is available to you at the gate? My other concern was that there's a single line there that you could write diabetes. Doesn't really give any additional information to the people who are trying to help you what you might need help with. So that's an issue. Also, a quarter of travelers run out of insulin. That's what we found in our literature review. And they end up having to refill in a foreign country. So that's concerning as well, because if you're having issues just with this TSA notification card, what sort of issues are you encountering with a prescription, maybe that you have printed that you take with you? How readable is it going to be at a foreign site? And do you then have to prepare for that and ask your doctor for some sort of translation? I think that all of those things are possibilities and they would be helpful. But again, I don't think that they are available to the average person, and certainly not something that you would think about beforehand unless you knew that this was a significant experience of running out of medication. The other thing was that there were recommendations about not keeping your insulin in your luggage because it might get lost, it might freeze. And yeah, there is no carry-on bag limit that applies to medication, but let's be real. The guy back there that you see with all of these bags, that is the reality of traveling now, especially internationally. I went to Stanford this weekend, as I mentioned, and I actually was not allowed a carry-on bag. I didn't realize that my ticket, because it was less costly, actually did not let me put something in the overhead bin or under the seat in front of me. So bringing an additional bag that was about the size of a small briefcase was an additional $25 each way. So if I do have the option of bringing one bag and I have to bring in enough insulin to sustain me for an entire trip, how much is that taking away from the costs that I've budgeted for this trip? And also, are my arms free, honestly, to carry that much? Ultimately, people had a lot of concerns about self-disclosure. So when you're talking about pump management for those people who have an insulin pump and they actually have it on them, what do you do during screenings? The literature says X-ray machines should have no effect on these monitoring devices or the insulin pumps. And here's the problem. Type 1 diabetes and even type 2 are invisible if they're well managed. I'm a doctoral student. I am a 40-year-old woman. I think I'm in average shape. If you saw me walking down the street, I look average. It might not occur to you that I have type 2 diabetes that I've had since I was 26. So if I'm in an environment and I have altered level of consciousness, I seem kind of irritable or I'm seeming dizzy, you may not pick up on the fact that I have a chronic illness, and that's the reason that I'm experiencing that. And that interventions that have to be put in place immediately are going to be different for me than they are for someone else. So in a lot of cases, people said, hide your condition during the screening. It'll make it easier for you. Be an advocate for yourself. Don't let TSA bully you. This happened to me. A new TSA agent was confused. The supervisor kept asking me why I disconnected my pump. Right? This is a very recent comment section point that was in response to someone saying, maybe I should just hide my whole condition, sneak on through, see if I can walk through the metal detector, and if nobody stops me, then great. The other one was remove your device. That's crazy talk. Even if it's just the transmitter, I always have mine taped down, and removing it for airport security would be difficult, to say the least. We simply don't know if the transmitter will be impacted or it was impacted. That's the most important thing. Let's say I get through safely. Do I now need to worry that my transmitter is going to be appropriate and I'm going to have a serious hypoglycemic incident when I'm in the air? So this project really highlighted the idea that online information is not accessible. There's language barriers, there are access barriers. It may not be reputable, which is really important, but also there's a lack of consistency. And seeking out your own resources to try to help or facilitate international travel might just leave you more confused. The problem was the scholarly consensus wasn't that much better. There was disagreement in the literature that was presented, and frankly, this final quote really summarizes our entire experience of looking at this phenomenon. Yeah, it's a live and learn thing. Sometimes you just have to be smarter than the people that are supposed to be helping you. Just make sure you know your rights before flying out, as TSA checkpoints can be brutal. Most times, no problems. Other times, well, it can be a total nightmare. So this really makes you think about the patient experience when we're dealing with disparities health, or at least it should. Because not all chronic illness experiences are the same across the board. Depending on your inherent family situation, support, whether or not they're comfortable with a disease process like this, but also depending on your economic situation. Really, I mean, we're really talking about social determinants, educational determinants, economic determinants of health. And this experience can vary even across those who are the most educated, the most financially well supported. Even in those groups, we're seeing that this experience can be brutal. So what does that mean for my particular population of Latinas over 45 who are living with diabetes, who, based on my recruitment so far, are by and large living in a multi-generational situation, the primary breadwinners for their family, and dealing with a variety of other social issues within the younger generations that they're trying to manage and be supportive of. So our initial thought about the creation of a diabetes etiquette card, but for travel, was built on something that was proposed by the Behavioral Diabetes Institute. It was more than proposed, it was actually realized. You can buy this for $1.25. It is a small fold-up card, and it really talks about how do you deal with diabetes etiquette when you don't have diabetes. So it's some very simple steps, just 10 steps that fold up for a person who's trying to talk to a family member or a loved one who has diabetes in a way that's inoffensive, not threatening, really explaining and expressing a desire to understand and be supportive. And something like this would be very helpful, our team believes, for people who want to travel internationally and even locally and are worried about it because of their insulin use. Now, my focus specifically in this Latina over 45 diabetes experience is mental health. I look at diabetes with depression and anxiety. And really, these are self-sustaining loops. Being concerned about your chronic illness, ashamed of your ability to follow it, worried about obesity and lack of exercise, makes you less socially connected and less willing to go outside, makes you less willing to engage in an exercise program, which then worsens your primary situation of the obesity and or diabetes, right? So really, we need to encourage people to feel willing to get out there, not be scared to get out there, and really expand what their world is once the chronic illness becomes a factor of who they are. It has to be, I'm a person living with diabetes. I'm also a PhD student. I'm also a mother. I'm also a wife, right? I'm not a diabetic, because using that terminology and that approach locks people into that chronic illness mindset, and it prevents them from also being, I'm an international traveler. I work at a variety of places all over the country, right? We really want to encourage mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, along with physical health. Particularly in the nursing community, we are about this holism that we believe makes people able to live their best lives in a way that a clinical focus on physical health really doesn't support. So thank you very much for your time. Here's the references. Please feel free to leave a comment on the YouTube page. We also have a Facebook group called Theory Generator Playground. Feel free to join if you're interested in diabetes, community health, the work that I'm doing with the Latino population in Southern California. But beyond that, always appreciate your interest. Thank you again to Stanford MedX, the Emerging Leaders Program. Thank you to my partner, Schwinn. Thank you very much to Julio Roldan for all of the support and academic enthusiasm you brought to the project. This was definitely a life-changing and perspective-changing experience for me, and I'm incredibly grateful.